15 minutes more, we'll speak a bit like that. When asked me to tell something about current situation in Europe, continental Europe, I will not speak about UK, what is happening there at multicultural level, what is happening in multi-religious level, and what is this issue of radicalization and so, and to make it concrete, my NGO is situated in Molenbeek, if the name is known to you, Molenbeekistan as it was called, and because some jihadism is starting from there and from London also, and from Toulouse. I don't know if you know Europe very well. Sorry that I asked that. Do you know the situation quite well? So I think that what is happening now in Europe is we have a lot of, we have first to understand very well, I think, as I see it, the situation, we have to understand that we are at the second and third generation for migrations coming from the Maghreb, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and from Turkey. So we are in a generation that is not longer speaking in terms of migrants. Okay, it is very important to understand that. The migrant has always somewhere in mind that he is invited, that he is an invited one, that he is a guest. Nowadays we are with Moroccan kids, Turkish kids that see themselves, how do they see themselves? Turkey, Morocco is not really their country of provenance as they see it anymore, but they may have sometimes a problem of acceptance, of being accepted or not. That's one aspect. And at the same time, we have also new migrations coming in and coming in. There's in Europe, some of our more important cities have more than half of their citizens coming from outside, having their roots outside Europe. I take Rotterdam, Amsterdam, take Brussels. Even if they have Belgian citizenship, if you are in Brussels, you are in a diverse city. And that's quite new. You know, when I was a child, and I'm not that old, going to Brussels was going to a city where there were Flemish and Francophone, French-speaking people, and that was it. Today, if my family is coming from elsewhere and goes to Brussels, they go, as they say, sometimes to a foreign country. You see, that's the difference. In one generation time, that's what happens in some of the European cities, is this change. And okay, something is moving. Good. Now, is there an impact at religious level? Yes, there is an impact. We assist, and I prefer not to speak in religious terms as if religions are systems. Because I'm speaking of, I'm an anthropologist. When I speak about religions, I speak about human beings, not homogeneous groups, not homogeneous communities, but human beings where some are making transitions also, crossing borders, as we say. For example, some people are intensifying a lot their religious attitude. That's very typical for first-generation migrants. I don't know in the US, but in Europe, which is quite secular, more secular than the US, you see that a lot of these first-generation migrants are intensifying. What do I call intensifying? It's not a value judgment, but they are becoming, that's a bit later on, Wahhabi, attracted by Wahhabism. Because in Europe you have a huge investment to preachers coming from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries, because there was a lacune, there was, you know, European countries were not organized to work with new populations, with Islamic populations, for example, and thus Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries invested a lot in our European cities with a certain impact on Wahhabism and things. Okay. You have transitions also, people conversions. We have a lot of conversions, people becoming neo-Muslim, neo-Sunni. You have also Muslims becoming evangelicals. And you see, there's a lot of things, a lot of situations of moving. Okay, what interests you most? Why this success of some jihadism? Why so many people are going to Syria for the moment, relatively. Belgium, for example, is known as the country where proportionally, most young people are going to Syria. Why is this happening? France has also a lot of jihadis going to Syria, and let's not forget there are a lot of other people who sympathize also with that. So where is this coming from? That's a bit the question, the major question that I want to submit some suggestions. Looking to the guys that I know that went from Molenbeek to Syria, looking to who they are, the first thing that strikes me a lot is that they are not practicing Muslims. They were not practicing Muslims. There were young kids who, yes, their parents were Muslim, traditional Muslims, you know, rural Islam, staying there. A lot of them were also in drugs dealing, were involved in drugs dealing. That's the reality. And what is true is that already from the 90s, there were people coming from the GIA meaning the Groupe Islamique Armée in France, coming to Brussels, for example. I'm speaking of the mid of the 90s, going also to London, going to Hamburg in Germany. These were people who went to Afghanistan very often, came back from Afghanistan. Some of them, not all, were implied also in the Twin Tower affair. Nizar Trabelsi, for example, who stayed also in Hamburg, then came to Brussels. But these are not these young kids. These are not these young ones who go to Syria today. So what happened? That is the question where also our intelligence services are reflecting on how can we explain that? Now what happened, I think, and that's as long as they went to Afghanistan, there was no problem in the perception of the Europeans. As long as they went there, I remember that there were people comparing them with Europeans going to Spain in the 30s to fight against Franco, you remember, or in the 30s to fight against the Russians at the East Front. So this was the comparison that was made in the end of the 90s. These were young people, there were not so many, going to Afghanistan, coming back, and one said, okay, they were fighting against the Russians there. And it's far from my bed, also Afghanistan. Now, when I reconstruct the story in the district where I am working in an NGO in Brussels, the same people, or some of them, stay there in a marginal position in some streets there in Molenbeek, which is one of the municipalities in Brussels. The intelligence services knew that. I remember very well that at the end of the 90s, I was director then of the Center for Equal Opportunities. And in one of these pseudo-mosques, because this was not really a mosque, this was a prayer place like that in Molenbeek, and there was also a site on the internet which was very anti-Semitic. I remember that I with a complaint against that at the court, and nothing happened. And when I took contact then with the intelligence service and saying, well, how do you explain that nothing happens? They say, oh no, we know where they are. We know where they are. If we intervene, maybe they will look for another place, so we have to look for them again. But now we have it under control, they are there, and also the French intelligence is controlling them, and even the Mossad knows where they are, so no problem. This was the mentality in Europe, in our cities in the 90s, at the end of the 90s. It changed a bit with the Twin Towers, I have to say, when this happened, because maybe you know, but one of the killers of Massoud was the commander in Afghanistan, was killed 2 weeks before the Twin Towers, or some days before the Twin Towers, and one of the killers of Massoud was coming from Molenbeek in Brussels. So there was some surprise at that moment. So what's happening there? It is someone from Molenbeek going to Afghanistan and killing Massoud, the commander there. So there was some surprise, and one started to control, but nothing special happened. Because in the meantime, something else happened in Europe, and that's the impact of the internet. I don't know if you heard about Abu Musab al-Suri. You don't hear about that. Was one who was not longer working in Europe through physical contacts with the people, but who invested a lot in the internet. And what we discover now is that a lot of these young people are really looking continuously at this internet, at these YouTube movies, at these films, speaking then about Syria, about what happens there, speaking there about Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, speaking about these things. And you know, Belgians, the other ones, we are looking at other media than they are looking at. So we remained very absent to what happened in their world. We were looking at other things than these young kids were looking at. And also our intelligence service were looking at other things. There is a dualization in our cities about some young people living before the internet, full of conspiracy theories. They don't longer believe in what establishment is saying, in what the media are telling. They don't longer believe in what the authorities are telling. They believe only what is said there in some places in the internet. And now, and I will end with that because I think that then it is better that we discuss a bit and that we have question answer. How does recruitment work, concretely speaking? And I'm very concrete in that because I know it is really like that it works. Recruiters are very often people coming from this first and second generation jihadism. The ones who went to Afghanistan, came back. I can give the names, Melouk, okay, it will be unknown, I guess, in the US, but people who were already in jail in France at the end of the 90s and now are free again, and who have their other people around them who are the recruiters. What is very typical is these recruiters are not speaking about Islam to the young boys and the young kids. They are speaking about other things. They are speaking about how are you, do you have a job, how is it possible you have not a job, the state hates you, you cannot trust it, look, and so on. And they are not contacting Muslims who have a clear structure in mind. They are not contacting this young, where they say, when they are waiting outside the mosques, they are very they are good psychologists. They understand very well where you have someone who say, okay, is a Muslim. That's not the one who interests them. They are interested in the ones where they have the impression that they live in a gray area, that they are not sure. And then they contact them, speak about their problems, and then they say to them, oh, you have a problem. No, I know your parents cannot help you because they don't know Islam. But listen, look at the internet, look at that. There you will see a savant, you will see a scholar, and he will explain you. And I don't know if you looked at these movies, YouTube for jihadism, they are very professionally, very well made. For me, it remains a surprise. Honestly, these are intelligent, these are specialists who make that. And now I come back and I end with that, speaking about the attacks in Paris, speaking about the attacks in Brussels. For me, I have no doubt this is not programmed by these young boys or these young people. They are executors, but I can't simply believe that they are the engineers who are really programmed that. And I fear we are not at the end. I fear that even if now one took them, one knows who did these attacks, but I think as long as there is no solution for this caliphate story, because caliphate, they have it in mind, many of these young people, as long as there's no solution for that. And I fear that after Syria, there is a risk that it may become Libya or something else. As long as we have no solution for that, I fear we'll still continue to have this problem of jihadism. Okay, that's what I want to give as an introduction. The only thing I don't want to give as an impression, I see this jihadism story I distinguish that from Islam. Okay? That's when I have to speak about that in Belgium, also at TV, and so I say, listen, one thing is Islam. And the debate about Islam, and the debate, I don't know how it is in America, in the US, but in Europe, it is the discussion about a Western Islam or a European Islam or not. That's one discussion. The other discussion is marginal young people from a Muslim provenance, okay, sociologically Muslim, but not practicing Muslims, who become attracted at a certain moment for the caliphate ID and go to Syria. That's it. That's my short intro. When asked me 15, 20 minutes, I respect that. Yeah.
Let me say I'm a journalist. My name is Penny Starr, and I work for CNS News. We're a website. And I find what you're saying really fascinating because for the attacks that happened, they said the Islamic State claimed responsibility. And so are you saying that it's that the Islamic State, the group of people that are operating under that name, and they're doing horrible things, killing a lot of people, including Muslims, that is disconnected from the religion? Is that what you're saying? And that these young people who would become suicide bombers or do these terrible acts, that they're recruiting them for something other than a religious with a religious motivation, that they're motivated by something that's completely separate from Islam? That's what I heard you say. I want to make sure that I understand.
Well, I have my questions also. Thus I am not sure about some things. When I gave a conference about that at my university, I said, for me it's not clear, this Islamic State, if this is a mafia structure, or if this is really an Islamic State, or both, a combination of both, not excluded as some interpretation of Islam, but clearly also with a mafia structure in it, the way it works. I was in Sicily for 2 years. I made my PhD and that, and I recognize very well some ways of working. arguments pro are that some people in ISIS are coming from the Ba'ath Party in Iraq. Those were people who were very close to Saddam Hussein, and Saddam Hussein was not really a brilliant practicing Muslim.
Right.
That's the least that you can say. Now, and these people have a high position in ISIS. That's one thing. Second thing that I see that there is a contact till now with Abu Iyad. Who is Abu Iyad? Abu Iyad is who is now in Syria and who was one of the sources of the Twin Tower. He is known as one of the inspirators of the Twin Tower affair, Abu Iyad. Because we are speaking of 2000 and now 2016. The same guy is there.
He's in Syria, you're saying?
He is in Syria. Yeah. I'm very formal. He is there. And he has still an impact now. I think and that's a bit the sense of my answer now. I am not sure about certain things. I feel unsure, but I have my doubts. That's what I am sure. What I am sure about is, listen, Abrini, Salah Abdeslam. I know these guys. It's impossible. Believe me, it's impossible that they programmed these attacks in Paris and in Brussels. They have not the brains for that. They simply have not the brains. So I am very surprised to hear that in Europe the media and also some politicians are continuing to say, now we have the coordinator or we have this or that. I don't believe that.
What do you believe then?
That the brains are in Syria. And maybe that some of them are also in Europe. I believe that ISIS really is better organized than we think. Because I think they really have also their intelligence and their informants in Europe. And I'm not paranoid. I don't think that. But I believe that they have that. And that's a bit why I fear that we are not at the end. Okay? Now, what may change? What may change is, I think that in recruitments, you have a reservoir, you have a basin, and this may be limited. So I think that what was at disposition in Molenbeek, for example, as young criminals to be recruited, has been recruited. So if they want other criminals, they will have to look out elsewhere. The question is, do they want other criminals? I spoke with Kozrokavar. I don't know if you know Kozrokavar is a specialist in France. You have some interesting guys, you know. You have Gilles Capel, you have Olivier Roy, you have Kozrokavar. I spoke with, I know very well Gilles Capel, I know Kozrokavar. They have not the same position, but they are both interesting. Huh? And Kozrokavar said me, what strikes me is that there is a logic in the recruitment machine. Now they are looking in France for more qualified people. Engineers, other things. As they recruit in function of a state they want to establish there.
The caliphate?
The country.
The caliphate?
Yeah. So, but there's much that is unknown, There's much that is unknown, and yeah.
It's a moving target. Just to be fair, best of your understanding, I mean, could you speak further to the process of getting from, here's a young criminal punk, right, who is disaffected, has his problems with society and the way he's treated in his mind, but not a religious person, not an observant person. And yet the people who were involved in the attacks in Paris and Brussels and elsewhere knew that what they were on was undoubtedly a suicide mission, right? And so you mentioned the introduction of the idea of the caliphate, but how do you understand moving that raw material to the point where they are suicidal or suicide attackers?
That's hypothesis, no, what I will say. For me, that's a sectarization process. If I have to compare it with other processes that I could study that had nothing to do with what happens now, there is a certain sectarization process. And sectarization means disaffiliation from your former networks. You become disaffiliated. Thus you become disaffiliated from your family, from your friends. You enter in a new, you re-affiliate in a new small group, okay? And then you are isolated, you become isolated, physically isolated before your computer. And your head becomes filled in with that. I will make that very concrete with a lady, with a girl that I knew. She sleeps during the day. She is before her computer at night. The family is there during the day, but she is sleeping. And at night, she is before her computer. And mother has nothing to say to her. Broken family, there is no father in there. And before the computer and you chatting, you are promised a good husband, nice husband. A mistake that is made, and that's not a scientist who convinced me from that. That's when we are looking to the movies of Syria, we are looking to bombings, disasters. And he said to me, when these young people are looking to there, they see welfare, nice situations, brotherhood, sisterhood, and what we see normally in our mainstream media are cruel things. This is only 10% of what they are looking at. 90% of what they are seeing there is a good state, very well organized, clean. You will find all what you want. And he said, when you have to look, when they show also this 10% cruelty, but then it's full of Quranic and Hadith verses in color, shown in color in it, so that the attention goes to the Hadith verses and to the Quranic verses, and that the cruelty takes its sense from the verses. You understand what I mean? You are looking at cruel things, but at that moment, in orange or in white, you see Hadith saying you, okay, you have to do that. That makes sense because of this and that. And so they are programmed in another way than we are looking at. And one of the young boys, for example, in the NGO foyer where I'm working, say, you know, there's a youth house there. One of the things is a youth house. And he comes there, he enters, and he does nothing, not very much there. He is there only with friends and so on. And speaking with him like that and asking, but Kader, what are you doing here? He says, well, here I feel safe. And I don't know what may happen when I am outside. I may become a radical, maybe. And here I feel safe. You see what I think that as long as these guys are part of a network of friends, they will not go to Syria, even if they are not strong believers. There are two categories of people who don't go to Syria. That's the strong believers. Those the practicing Muslims, really practicing Muslims, don't go to Syria. And the ones who are more secular, let us say, but have good friends and continue to be affiliated with their friends. They don't go. The ones who go, who are vulnerable, are this in between. And that's the problem for community work. Because in community work, I don't know how it works here, but in Europe, community work works with people who are, they are involved in that, they come spontaneously, but there is always a population that you don't, you have no contact with them. And if these people don't go either to the mosques or are convinced, then that's the vulnerable population. If this may be an answer. Yeah.
So from my perspective, I see converts as especially vulnerable to radicalization. If they don't have a support system, but I see the political rhetoric in the U.S. and Europe as rapidly increasing Islamophobia. Why are we, I want to say allowing this kind of rhetoric to happen, but it's only going to make that reservoir pool you were talking about larger. If a convert is trying to tell their family oh, I'm Muslim now, but because of the bombardment of all these images and of the persona that Muslims are violent, they're already they're already completely isolated from their family. And I just see the reservoir is growing. So why, I don't know, why are we not, as a country, continuing to perpetuate these images of Islamophobia instead of trying to help, mosques deal with this problem?
I don't know if I understand well your question, but if your question is why do policymakers or don't react in a more adequate way?
Or even try to dialogue with actual Muslims.
It's not easy to answer to these things. And first, politicians, I don't know in the US, but here in Europe, have electoral reflections. I have the impression when they speak that their first audience is the people behind them. That's the people that they know that they represent. So when I take a position as a politician, as a minister, and I stay for a certain ideology, I know that I have to answer, and that will be my first answer will be to these guys there, behind me. Okay? That's what happens there. Call it populism, but there is more populism than before. And honestly, I have the impression also in the US, but surely in Europe. Okay? And then second thing, I think there is not so much expertise as it seems at first view in our cabinets and in our administration. Yeah? And third thing then in Europe is who represents Muslims? again, I don't know how it is in the US, but take Turkish Muslims. There's already a bit of fight, politically inspired, inside the Turkish community in Europe. So, and politicians then become very, how to say, they say, okay, we need Turkey, we need, so let us, and we are even making a step afterwards today in Europe, in my view, because I was chief of cabinet in the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, and I know that at that moment, our option was Muslims will be Europeans, so the countries of provenance have to go back, have to abandon their populations, their own, because they continue to see them as their citizens. The Moroccan government, Moroccan embassy, saw Moroccan people in Europe as Moroccans. Idem, same thing for Turkey. Now, in the 90s, the message was, okay, Turkish embassy, Moroccan embassy, that's no longer your stuff, it's our stuff. Nowadays, we are going back to the former situation for security reasons. You know what I mean? The contacts between government now in Europe and Moroccan government and Turkish government are becoming closer and closer again. Yeah? Because we hope, government hope, that Moroccan government will control better the radicals, and Turkish government, and you have also the refugee issue, that Turkish government will control that. And in this whole debate, the Muslims, now I come closer to your question, I think, the Muslims are only second in the approach, come only at the second moment, at the third moment. There's more, the security logic is dominant one.
So when do you think Europe is going to learn from these, as you said, what is happening with immigrant Muslim populations, how they come, they hold on to their traditional values, they don't assimilate, they don't, feel a part of the greater population. People as yourself have talked about this and how that is part of the recruiting, and how we have seen it is a part, in large part, the problem. But Europe is going to Morocco, is going to Turkey to solve these problems instead of looking at, when is that going to shift?
Well, there is a good message also in what is happening. And that's at the grassroots level, what I feel, for example, in Molenbeek and in Brussels, we are becoming much more closer. The population itself, that's the ones who stay there, the NGOs, for example, the NGO world, is not following the same logic as governments. So if I, for example, now, or I call someone in a mosque in Molenbeek or elsewhere, we have immediately contact. We come immediately together because we have the same interest. We have the same interest. They have no interest that the young kids should go to Syria. We have not interest. So governments have their logic, but civil society has its own logic. And it's not the same one. And that's the good message, I think. The bad message is that our governments are,
This is really fascinating stuff, and I'd like to comment on the last things that I'm going to resist, because what I'm trying to get my mind around is you've identified various generations and various areas, and I can't sort of fit all this together. In other words, the Afghani side of this is quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
Of course, they're not generationally connected at all. Then they came back, and some of them ended up in French prisons. Is that what?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we have the Baathists. Now, 50 years ago, when I used to know Baathists, they were a violent group of people in Iraq, and it seems they've remained that way all the way through Saddam Hussein. These people are completely different in my mind from people who live in Europe or this new generation or the people who went to Afghanistan. I mean, the Baathists are a secular group. They're not a religious.
Absolutely.
Then we have the recent groups of people who've come from North Africa and many who are not so recent. Anyway, I'm trying to get my mind around this whole matrix of generations and experiences, and help me do this. I just want to make one comment about yours. I mean, Europe it has got a large Muslim population, and they're not only from the Middle East. I mean, they're from Indonesia, they're from Pakistan, and so on. America has a tiny Muslim population that, aside from Detroit, is pretty scattered around the country, and it's comprised of people mainly who came here as professionals from different Muslim countries and are pretty integrated now. So it's really not a very comparable situation. I mean, the reaction of the American public to Muslims in America is so completely distorted because of the really small numbers and who they are and where they are and all that kind of stuff, as opposed to Europe, where the populations are much larger. Anyway, please help me understand this.
Very shortly, I will try, because it is a story that's a course, this whole thing. It's a lecture series. But of course, I think what happened, when I reconstruct from I am in this stuff from the 70s on. Huh? So, and if I reconstruct a bit what happened in Europe, and Saudi reaction. Because the Iranian Revolution was a Shiite impact, and Saudi Arabia has reacted on that. Okay? From the 90s on, I see very clearly Saudi investments in Europe. And brotherhoods also. The 90s are the period of the brotherhoods, the Ikhwan, or the brotherhood. Not so much all these Salafisms from later that we see now, which is a very complex thing, this Salafism. So let's not start this discussion of the end of the 90s. Yeah, that's the end of the 90s. The Wahhabis were already more intellectual, the recruitment already a bit more intellectual than, for example, Tablighi, who came earlier. Now, what happened in this, does you see a certain, what in Europe was called Islamization, and the extreme right parties made it a terrible thing, a certain Islamization in the 90s. Okay, at that moment, in this thing, we have in France people from the group Islamique Armée, GIA. I am speaking of beginning of the 90s, 95. Kelkal is killed in France. He is seen afterwards the first European jihadi. He was a young intellectual who finished in prison and who justified his killing and his attacks to what France did in Algeria. That begins. He has some of his friends, Begal, and I can't put the names, but okay, friends who are not put in jail, who after the killing of Kelkal go to Afghanistan, go also to London, yeah? Come also to Brussels. Listen, Paris, Brussels, that's 1 hour, eh? You see, you are in 1 hour, you are there with the train, eh? Just don't think the distances in American terms, eh? Eh? So you are so in from Paris and Brussels, okay? So you have at the end of the 90s, there's people going to Afghanistan, to London, Brussels, Toulouse, okay? That's what Gilles Kepel will call the first generation in jihadism, in European jihadism. Yeah? At a certain moment, the field changes. From Afghanistan, it's the US that enters in the focus to be attacked. That is the second generation of jihadism. But there is continuity. That's my thesis, that's not the thesis of everyone. There is some continuity. Of course there are new people, but there's some continuity also. And as they attack that, here the Twin Towers and so on. Okay? But after all, it is a failure. This attack is a failure afterwards, because it is beginning of the war, of things and so on, and they lose, they were losing, okay? And the field changes again. It becomes now Europe. Yeah? And then there is an ideologist there who says, listen, our strategies are the wrong strategies. We have to change that. We have not to organize it from a vertical perspective. We have to work from grassroots level. We have to make that there are, to create cells. And we will take Europe for that. Yeah? And that's this famous, how is his name? Abu al-Musab al-Suri. We are with him, we are in 2005. If I reconstruct now in Brussels, but I didn't do that in 2000, but if I reconstruct it now, these are the same people, some of the same people of Afghanistan, some Nizar Trabelsi implied in the 9/11 story. Nizar Trabelsi was put 10 years in jail in Belgium and is now in the US because US asked his extradition, and Belgium was very happy to give it. Because everywhere where he was in prison in Belgium, he radicalized people around him.
Sounds like
Okay.
you're saying that the same people, though, that it's exactly the same people, new generations, but
That
the same.
there is continuity. Some are the same people who continue, and new generations enter in it, and new strategies enter in it. But these older generations are seen as heroes by these young kids. They are seen as they are the heroes. They are the ones who did the Twin Towers. They are the ones who fought against the Russians. They are the ones who, and in the messages of jihadism, it is always, have a look at that, it's always how strong they are. They win their fights. It's very important for them. And why are they in crisis now a bit? Because they have it difficult nowadays to show that they are always winners, and they cannot pay anymore as before their soldiers there, because they paid the people, and now it seems that the salaries are lowering. Okay? Thus it becomes more difficult. But thus you have, to come to your question, you have a story starting in the 90s with fields changing. Now the question is a bit, now Islam, what comes Islam in it, what is Islam in it, and what is, let us say, Machiavellic power in it. For me, that's not clear. I say it very openly, for me, that's not clear.
How strong the batteries are not clear to you?
There are people who say, I have contact with some people also in the intelligence, okay, and who say to me, listen, there is financing coming clearly from Gulf states, from Sunni states, against Iran. It's a very complex story. Listen, is there such a diversity of stakeholders in the Syria thing? You have Russia with its interests. You have United States, you have United Kingdom, you have Turkey, with the Kurdish thing also in it. So you have so many stakeholders that it becomes very difficult to understand where is it about Islam and where, I don't know.
All those stakeholders are not Islamic.
But
I mean, Turkey is theoretically.
these young people at a certain moment believe in the caliphate. That seems clear. Otherwise, as Kozrokovar says it, at a certain moment they change their social death with a heroic death. That's and they are. It's difficult to say to the Belgians that they are victims, of course. After the attacks, if you say these young people are the victims, they say, hey, they are the victims, yes. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, a follow-up question to your point about the Brussels and France attacks, that you puzzled at why does the governments and the news media say that they've gotten the master brains of it, that you believe that or know that the people who did the capture don't have the intellectual prowess to organize such a thing. Why is it that the governments and the newspapers are not saying that? And then, on something you said earlier about the internet and the news media, of what the conspiracy theories that these young men see. But the examples you gave were things like Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo.
No, that's not conspiracy.
Yeah, that's
I
what
can
it's
give
not.
you the examples.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was.
I will give you the examples. Well, a well-known example, or you all know that the Twin Towers, that's not, you know that, that's a traditional conspiracy example. Twin Towers are done by the CIA and the Mossad, okay. But a typical example is also the Marines in the Thalys train. You remember there were two Marines in a Thalys train going from Amsterdam to Paris, and that there was...
Stop the guy?
Yeah, stop the guy.
Yeah.
Listen, these Marines were not there because they are tourists.
No.
They were put there by the CIA.
What do you think?
Or, no, I don't think, but I don't think. But that's common in this. They say, listen, these Marines who are there. No. I'll give you another example, Salah Abdeslam. Salah Abdeslam is the guy who didn't explode himself there in Paris. He came back. What they say, do you believe if I go with a riot gun from Brussels to Paris and I don't use the riot gun there in Paris and I come back to that to Brussels, you believe that? No. He simply had absolutely not the intention to kill in Paris, but he was used by others and so on. So that's what I mean with conspiracy theories. Oh, there are a lot of conspiracy theories. Yeah. And does it mean that the people who believe in that they approve the attacks? No. No, but they simply, they can't believe that these guys do such things, and thus they need rationalizations themselves. Yeah? Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
about the NGOs you mentioned. Wondering if there are some NGOs like ISNA here or ICNA, like the local American Muslims, instead of associated with their home country. It's their country is they born here, they are speaking on behalf of Muslims instead of the ethnic communities their families ancestors associated with. This is one question because the logic of this question is this: ISNA and ICNA, they made the second and third generation of American Muslims really attached to the American Muslimness instead of the home country association with with their parents. The second question is about the competition between Al Qaeda and ISIS. You mentioned the first and second generation, and then the grassroots mobilization and so forth. But the beginning of the question is at the beginning of caliphate. It was a clear kind of division of labor in which there is a land, there is a territory that they are seeking to get their recruits over there instead of being in Europe and make attacks in Europe, as Al Qaeda was calling to them. So it was a clear discursive, I will say, competition. But now with the latest attacks, do you see a kind of shift in ISIS strategy, becoming more a competitor in terms of the strategic attacks in Europe? And what would be the case if this is so? If this is the new strategy of ISIS, what would be the implications in the long run?
Let me start with the second thing. I can, as an anthropologist, I can only speak about things I see and I observe. And it is a strange thing that I see that, for example, in Molenbeek, the same recruiter recruited first for Al Qaeda. If Shabab in Somalia was Al Qaeda, he recruited one brother for Somalia and the other brother 1 year later for Syria, for ISIS. The same recruiter. Now you can say maybe he was paid, that's maybe an explanation, and he is paid as well by one as by the other. I don't know, but I know that one brother left for Somalia and another brother left for, recruited by the same guy. What does it mean, such things? What does that mean? I hear from Syria that there is competition among them, but from time to time they become allies, and at other moments they are again in competition one with the other. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what happens there precisely. I don't know. I do not know more than you do. Now, the other thing, have we Muslim associations of young, yes, there are. But let me say they are not strong enough most of the time. One of the stronger ones to pronounce itself is still Hizmet for the moment because, because it is translocal. And the other associations are too local. They are in one district, in one city, and not in the other one. And Hizmet is the only one in Belgium that has different, and to be heard, really to be heard, you should have some extension, I think. Good?
Can you just say a word about the Gulen movement, because you're associated with it, and it's now, or maybe you're not, maybe you're just...
No, I will be very simple, because I'm not a Muslim, though maybe one day will become, but okay. For me, listen, for 10 years, between 89 and 99, I had to find a spokesman for Belgian government. So I was in my former position. In Europe, in many countries, you have, you know, a relation between state and religion, that where a religion should be represented by some spokesmen that are accepted then by the authorities. So the government sent me to find such a spokesman. My God, took 10 years. Because, yeah, it took 10 years because you cannot impose it. In the European system, you cannot impose and say you are the leader of that. You have to ask them to make an agreement among themselves. So you can imagine, among themselves to say, listen, we agree all in this council or in this person to be our representative in the talks with the government. So 10 years experience, and in this 10 years you meet a lot of Muslims, and I had the impression then at a certain moment I said, listen, if I want a movement that accepts the position of science, that wants to be a modern, that has modernity somewhere in its program, and very simple, you know, that is open for dialogue. Okay, then I say, okay, that seems me a good partner. And then when I stopped my career there at Deng and was at the university again completely, and I had contact with some people, and I said, listen, if you want, we can make a chair here at the university, because I think it's important that Islam should be represented, even if Leuven is a Catholic university. It is important that Islam should be represented somewhere in university. It's important for emancipation and also for dialogue. And it was the beginning of the chair. And I didn't know nothing about all these things about Erdogan and all that. That's all things for later for me. Yeah. And so it started, and for me till now, no problem. I'm quite happy. I think it was a good choice. Yeah. You know, the popular ones in Belgium are among Moroccans is Tariq Ramadan, if it says to you, and among Turks as an intellectual, and among Turks is Fethullah Gulen. And for me, Fethullah Gulen is more transparent than Tariq Ramadan. That's my impression. I have no problem with Tariq, but he seems to be more transparent. Okay?
Thank you.
Go.
Please enjoy some food and